This is Carl Irwin again with another show, DCI show comparison. All right, we wanted something different from the example that I gave you the first time. We recently compared Star of Indiana in 1991 with Blue Devils 2014, and we were looking at comparisons of technical difficulty and the relationship between drill and music in different eras, sort of contesting the idea that contemporary drum and bugle corps has a lot of standing around and playing, and the implication of that is that it is easier to do these days than it was back in the day. And we made some comparisons, and I think I made a pretty compelling argument there with those two examples that is, I think, not an accurate assumption to make. I'm sure that won't stop the debate and the complaining, but at least I put my 2 cents in there as empirically as I could. Some of you took issue with the groups that I chose to use in the comparison. And again, I chose Star 1991 because it's a good show. I mean, it's one of the best shows around in that era, with George Zingali drill, his last drill, and it was very noteworthy drill. It's stuff that people remember. And also a music book that is considered by most people to be very complicated and complex. And I thought that would be a good demonstration as a representation of kind of the old guard, the older sort of time period, the older era. And then I used Blue Devils 2014 for the same reasons. It's a very high scoring show. I think it's the highest ever scoring drum corps show. And it stands out as one of the best examples of the contemporary sort of format, and we made that comparison. Some of you took issue with that. You thought that I should use some different groups. So we're going to go with 2 other championship performances that were recommended in that discussion. We're going to go with 1987 Garfield Cadets, and we're going to compare it to the 2017 Blue Devils, because that is a very controversial show, apparently. There's a lot of argument over the appreciation of that show and whether or not it is easy or if it is difficult. And we're going to stick to that premise. What we're trying to do is compare the standard of show design. What is the relationship between the music and the drill? And what does the drill writer do in complicated musical spots? Likewise, what does the music do in complicated drill spots? And we set up, I think, an expectation by looking at some of these older shows that I think falls in line with what we see today. But we're going to take a look at these 2 shows and see if that holds up. Are we going to notice some things about Garfield Cadets 1987 that demonstrate a consistency with Star of Indiana 1991? And are we going to see the similar relationship here, Blue Devils 2017 with Blue Devils 2014, and thereby find a similar relationship between the past and the present? I'll leave that mostly for you to decide, but I'm going to share my thoughts on that as we look. I'm trying to think here. A few considerations. Again, the Garfield show is in G bugles, and they are playing, I think, on 2-valved instruments, only 2 valves. That really doesn't mean as much. I think in the last example that I gave, I may have given the impression that there was some great advantage or disadvantage one way or the other. That's not true. There's not really a great advantage. It's only a difference of 3 half steps, a minor third between the 2, and that doesn't really change the tessitura enough to give a great deal of benefit one way or the other. The arguments for B flat over G really don't have much to do with that particular difference. It has to do with some other things. I will note that sometimes the higher register playing, particularly on the soprano bugles in G, was a little bit more flexible than what we get on B flat. There is that advantage, but otherwise it's not really a big difference. It doesn't matter if you're in G or if you're in B flat. When you get into the upper register, the harmonic series closes down and you're using fewer valves, no matter what key you're playing in, what transposition. So you'll note that any ostinato figures that are in the upper register are not using a lot of valve combinations to accomplish those repeating lines. That doesn't really seem to apply in the two shows that we're going to look at this time, because the Garfield show doesn't have really any ostinato patterns to speak of, and neither does the Blue Devil show. So we're going to really kind of throw out that aspect that we were looking at in Star 1991, and that is something that shows up in a lot of contemporary music today, ostinato patterns, but it's not really present in these two shows that we're looking at right now. So those are the considerations. Let's take a look first at Garfield Cadets, 1987. Garfield Cadets, 1987, Appalachian Spring, music of Aaron Copland, ballet for Martha Graham. That's something worth noting here, is that the source material is singular in this show, and there is a certain aesthetic quality, again, talking about aesthetics as being really the issue here, I believe. People have an expectation to be able to follow the music through, and if you know this piece, which a lot of music type people know this piece for sure, they're able to follow large chunks of music, large phrases beginning to end. They know what to expect, they know where they're at, and this show does that for them. Whereas some other shows that have a wide variety of source music and a kind of a convoluted, at least to them, convoluted arrangement, it's hard to follow. They're playing the main melody here, the shaker tune, full out, and they're not moving. Let's point that out. They're not moving. They're standing still to give us that opening statement. And we're already a minute into the show, a minute plus, so just now. We've only had a couple of visual moments. This is completely appropriate. It's completely appropriate to do that. Very good impact. We get into the lesser known material from the ballet. Interesting stop and go moment there. Compared to the Star 91 show, this has a wider responsibility in the music to larger sections of players. Sopranos are playing that melody. They're playing on the move. It's a moderate to larger step size. Notice right here, the soprano part gets complicated. A lot of staccato bouncing around, and they're not moving. Okay, so again, this is not a fluke. This is how you do it. It's when I said you could compare shows across years and still find the same result, I meant it. You're going to find this everywhere you look. So whenever responsibility increases for a group, if the drill writer has done their job, they should lower the expectation visually for that group to allow them to play cleanly. Segregation of the percussion, again, was much more prevalent at that time. So far, it's not terribly wild. Very beautiful linear drill, very well executed. Low velocity there. It's not, they're not really cranking anywhere. I think, they're not cranking anywhere, but when you add some of the pass-throughs that they're doing, you imply velocity, right? When you have two objects moving past each other, you get the combined velocity between the two, which is what contrary block, motion does for you later on when that starts to show up in drum corps going into the 2000s. Yeah, talk about the music a little bit here. They're playing very well. You can hear a difference in the quality of player from this era to later if you're listening carefully. And some of it's the miking. This is 1987, and the miking setup at that time wasn't quite as elaborate as it is today. A lot of staccato hits. It's just the way the music works. That's a great visual. Yeah, very readable form. So in the comparison that we're going to make, you have to acknowledge that this has a very readable quality to it. You know what they're doing is supposed to be what it is. And for the most part, you can tell when something isn't quite right. And we know that's right. We know exactly what that is. That's their logo. Again, they're standing still, very appropriate for the music. Low velocity on the ballad stuff, there's a universal quality in these shows. Yeah, this show makes great use of the front ensemble. It's a little bit ahead of its time, I think, in terms of arranging. The way that the front ensemble takes a very important integral part in the music. They do things that none of the other groups on the field can do. Yeah, they're moving, they're playing. You can kind of hear the feet in the playing a little bit. Comes the percussion line. They're fast. This is very fast tempo. When you have fast tempo, usually the drill writer will keep the step size pretty small. And you can see that going on here. They're keeping a pretty moderate step size, which is good writing. It allows them to play accurately without having to cut people out. I'm trying not to repeat things that I said on the last video, on the Star 91 video, because a lot of those things they still apply. That's a great novelty for the time. You get some contrary motion there. You follow the leader effect and the combined velocity of contrasting motion. It's not very hard music. They don't have a lot of fast-running lines. It's a lot of staccato playing, and what you get with that type of playing, that type of music, is you're looking at accuracy. Are they hitting the notes in those staccato intervals? And they are. They're doing very well with it. but in terms of fingering, in terms of valve combinations, it's not terribly demanding. Again, I think they're on 2 valve G bugles at this time. We have a discussion going about that on the other thread. The velocity slows down for this legato playing. Again, it's appropriate. It's also pretty necessary when you're playing legato music. It's easier to hear the feet in the music if you're moving. So they slow it down to make it cleaner. There we go. There we go. That was nice. Nice line there. A little short burst of difficulty. This is a part everyone remembers. It's not hard to do. It is uncomfortably similar to the drill that people hate today. And I can't help but notice that. But for some reason, it's okay here. You know, it's a really neat effect that the company front disintegrates into, I'll say the word scatter drill, and then it comes back together. And the crowd goes wild. Never really seen anything quite like that up until then. I like this little reverse kind of Z-pull that never really goes anywhere. It just stops there on the 50. It's a great effect. Yeah. So a lot of the same things that we talked about in 91. A lot of the same things we talked about from the 91 video, Star 91. You note that there's a divvying of responsibility, and then the velocity changes when the responsibility increases in the music. So again, this is really the only point we're making in these comparisons. We're not making a bunch of aesthetic judgments. That's for people with opinions to formulate, which they do. We're just trying to divorce the argument about difficulty from that debate. Because I think it doesn't deserve to be lumped in with that discussion. So yeah, that's it. Iconic performance, and this is one that people would have preferred, I think, to see other than that 91 in the comparison. But I think, honestly, I think it's quite similar. I think it stands up in the same way. If anything, there's a sense in which this music is a little bit more accessible, I think, than the Star music. At least it's shared responsibility. You don't have any one section that's really stuck with carrying most of the weight like you do with that Star one. At the same time, on Star 91, the Roman Images show, the fact that it is on one group does make certain parts of the visual a little bit easier for a larger group of people. So that's, I guess, one difference in there. But a very low number of sets, which means that you have a very large number of beats between transition points and changes in direction, and that is very helpful to playing phrases of music to be accurate. When you're doing that, it turns into parade playing with a facing, so that you're doing an upper body facing towards the sideline or the press box, whatever the case may be at the moment. But you're really you're parade playing because you have a long visual phrase that you're marching through at a consistent step size. As we get into the more modern shows and we get contrary motion, and block formation, we see a lot more sets. When you add subsets, there's a consequence to that. It means that you have more transition. It means you have more interruption, which means you have more interruption to the music too that you have to be aware of, and you have to time your music properly with every one of those transitions. Make sure everything lines up. So that was Garfield Cadets 1987. Let's take a look at the Blue Devils 2017. And we'll see what we find here. Again, we're looking for contrast and comparison of design choices. And I'll set you up with this one premise here. If it is such that harder music deserves consideration in the drill, and if it is such that the drill deserves consideration of music, what should we expect when we see a show with extremely difficult music? I mean, what would we expect to see? So, is this going to be within our range of expectation, or is this comparison going to defy the expectation? I think you already know where I'm going with that. But let's take a look at the Blue Devils next. All right, we've got the 2017 Blue Devils. '17 Metamorph. Right off the bat, I mean, this is pretty cool, visually speaking. I think, part of the nuance to this is there's a bit of a throwback to the past. Yeah, so the big beef here, right, is that they're doing some drill, but they're not playing. But again, what they're doing in the drill is pretty complicated. I mean, they're really running around there. Would you expect them to be playing? I don't think so. That doesn't fit the standard that we've set up from our look at the late 80s and early 90s. So now they're playing. That's not easy. Visually, they're moderate step size through that little ballad moment. This is all a percussion feature is what it is, so you have the percussion stationary front and center, low velocity, while the horns are dealing with visuals. That fits the model. It's a great visual moment. So they're not marching in the traditional sense, but they're moving and playing. And I can tell you that's not easy to do. They're marching quite a bit there, high velocity for a moment. Yeah. This is deceiving, this whole opening. And the percussion feature continues again. Percussion is staged front while the horns take care of visual work. And we get into this chromaticism, Flight of the Bumblebee business. Yeah, so the big question is do you expect them to move on this? That's a legitimate question. Because, in my opinion, the playing responsibilities here are kind of beyond the pale for traditional marching. And, I don't think they want to sacrifice the music. I think they want to keep that. There's some linear pinwheeling going on. So, on a technical level, we're seeing the same stuff we've seen before. That was playing on the move. Stop for the impact. I think people have a big problem with the aesthetics of this. It is not what they're used to. That's fantastic playing. Shared by the full ensemble with a very different kind of visual concept there. That's hard to do, and they're playing. And they're playing more than just sustained notes. That's a pretty high velocity move for a large number of people, and they pull it off quite well. Yeah, these kids are head and shoulders musically above what we've known from the past, and it really will stick out when we get to some of the solo stuff later. Yeah, so the interpretation of that is, there's a lot of moving of people and drill in the back, but they're not playing on it. It's a trade-off. But again, that trade-off is already established in history. That's how you treat drill. You get high velocity motion on people that have low responsibility musically. I think it's just irritating for people to see no playing, when that responsibility is given to someone else of playing. That was linear drill while playing. Regular step size. Here's some scattering going on. Again, the scattering stuff, just know that it is all planned. There's no path on there that is not rehearsed. This trombone solo is outrageously good. The talent these days is incredible. This is not really part of the discussion for the comparison, but I might as well bring it up. If you're looking for an argument for the use of amplification, this is it right here. It allows people to play at their best and give the greatest amount of nuance to their playing. And these guys are just killing it. I mean, they're killing it on these solos because of that. There's a pretty high velocity collapse there, a little bit of playing on it. Once again, the Blue Devils doing what they do. The visual focus is on the guard, which is a pretty traditional concept, really. Wow. Okay, so there's a ballad moment and no drill going on, and we saw that already. This is standard writing. There's nothing unusual about that. Non-traditional visual. It's a different aesthetic. That has to be rehearsed and worked out. And it's not, contrary to the opinion that it's easier to do that, it is not easier to do that than to march, linear form. It's just not aesthetically what some people want. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to like it. It's not personally, I would prefer that drum corps really take the audience seriously and try to write shows that they can guarantee a large group will enjoy. But and that's not to say that they weren't trying to do that here, but it's controversial. Three-dimensional percussion lines there again. I guess that's one. I'll say that's one tick on the side of contemporary drum and bugle corps. If you're trying to compare the visual with the technicalities of playing, the drum lines buck the expectation there. The drum lines are much more visual on playing now than they ever were before. That's a pretty significant thing going on down there in the high brass. They're all playing on that move coming into it. Pretty difficult passages there. Very chromatic. It's not visual drill in the traditional sense. It's something different. But it's not easier. That's not what it is. And again, the question is, would you expect them to be moving in high velocity drill on that, given the standard of the past, what we see in classic design? And I think the answer is no. You really wouldn't expect that. This is another unique visual moment. Some high velocity things are doing there. Very unorthodox. I guess marching you would call it. And that probably took some rehearsal to keep those forms together. So that wasn't standstill. I mean, don't get that impression. And as soon as that responsibility is done, the velocity picks up in the drill, just like you would in any other show design from any era. Very different visual, using those stairs and the mirrors. But they're not just running out and getting in place. That's all timed. That has to come out cleanly and accurately. Some good ripples. Excellent form guiding here on this linear drill. Different compartments. This would be another very difficult section I would point you to. A lot of box rotation going on here in various places. It's not a very cohesive drill. It's compartmentalized and segmented. So what you're dealing with is an aesthetic issue again, not a difficulty issue. This is difficult. This is as difficult as anything. And it happens at the same regularity as any other show. All right. Okay, so that's it. Just a few more things, I think, in comparison here, just to recap. Again, I think when you're watching this show, you're dealing with aesthetic issues, not technical issues. The playing is extremely difficult. It's on a considerably different level than anything you can compare to from the early 90s, and actually even just from the years around this. That was very, very challenging chromatic music with shared responsibility across the horn line. So that question is if they're going to play that kind of music, if they're going to play those kinds of passages, do we expect them to do it on the move with any amount of velocity in the drill? They do a lot of it on the move, just not in the classical sense of drill. That is, you're moving in a singular motion on a from one set to another, between transitions. What they're doing is they're doing different kinds of, kind of innovative, experimental sorts of movements, which we've seen before. They're just doing a lot more of it, and a little bit of marching, even classic marching there, that I think we don't necessarily give them credit for. But if you really want to be honest with that question, do you expect them to march, typical velocity drill on that kind of music? I don't think the answer can be yes. I don't know where you can get off expecting that. So they're really meeting expectations in the classic sense. Is there as much linear drill in this show as there was in 2014 that you can compare directly to the aesthetics of the late 80s, early 90s? No, obviously not. That they're doing something different. This is just a different aesthetic. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's easier. It's not so simple as that argument. They're just stopping playing and going again. I think you can see observably there's a lot more to it than that. And everything has timing, everything has calculation, everything is rehearsed to the step that's going on in there. So this talk is not done to make you like this show. I just, I would hope we can maybe appreciate at least technically what's going on here, and try to avoid that conclusion that this type of design makes it easier. I don't think there's anything easier about that show compared to 2014. I don't see any way in which you can say playing considerably harder chromatic music throughout the ensemble is easier, standing or moving, either way. I don't think that you can say that a different visual aesthetic is necessarily easier than a more classic visual aesthetic. It's just different. It's not what we're used to. Do I hope that they keep making shows like that one? Not really. I'm not a huge fan of this. I'm like a lot of you. I would prefer to see something in my comfort zone. At the same time, this show makes me smile. I do enjoy it. I like it. It's impressive to me. It's certainly musically. I get a kick out of it, and some of the visuals are pretty creative. So I certainly would not like a group to stop innovating just because it's different from the what we're used to. That's against what innovation is. But at the same time, like you, I appreciate the classic aesthetic too, and I can understand that gripe and that concern. But anyway, I promised we would do it. We did the comparison. I'm sure you have some of your own opinions about what you saw here between 87 and 2017. But I think that you can justify technical comparability, and I think you really do have to give, as you did before, you have to give the edge to the newer drum corps, and that has to do mostly with recruiting and what they're able to get in terms of talent these days. A little bit different from what they had back at that time. So anyway, there it is. There's the comparison. So go ahead and fight, and hope you enjoyed this one.